Right now, curl your fingers around whatever you're holding. Feel how your wrist rotates, how your thumb crosses to meet the others without a single conscious command. That grip has a birthday. In Montana, a set of fossil teeth, barely bigger than rice grains, pinned down a date, somewhere between 105,000 and 139,000 years after the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs. Whatever left those teeth had already twisted ankles built for branches, not open ground. It was climbing before the dust had finished settling. The obvious story says primates are an African invention, born under African sun, raised on African savanna. Is that actually where the trail starts? It isn't. Paleontologists named the Montana animal Purgatorius, and it may be the oldest primate we know of. Its ankles gripped bark the way no shrews ever needed to. Somewhere between 75 and 55 million years later, a full toolkit locked into place across its descendants. Grasping hands took shape, flat nails replaced claws, and eyes turned forward instead of sideways. Hunting fast insects and spotting ripe fruit reward the exact same skill, so depth perception and precise grip evolved together as a single package. Here's where the story takes its first real detour, and it doesn't happen in Africa. Around 40 million years ago, the first higher primates appear, the ancestors of every monkey, ape, and human alive today. The fossil is barely bigger than a modern mouse. Researchers found it in China and named it Eosimias, dawn monkey. Its heel bone already curves for moving through branches the way a modern monkey does. Further finds in Myanmar and Pakistan point at the same answer. If a story this strange already has you rethinking where it came from, subscribe now. The stranger part hasn't even started. Asia ran the opening act of primate evolution, not Africa. Getting the anthropoids from one continent to the other should have been simple, just branch to branch. Except the continents weren't touching. An ancient sea called the Tethys separated them, and no amount of climbing crosses open water. The fix came from underground. Heat rising through Earth's mantle pushed the African and Arabian plates north, welding Arabia onto Africa. By roughly 20 million years ago, a land bridge called the Gomphotherium closed the gap for good. The primates stranded in Asia finally walked across. The ones who stayed behind mostly died out in a later cooling event. This story could easily have ended on the wrong continent. The migrants split once they reached Africa. One population somehow crossed the Atlantic Ocean and became the ancestors of every monkey in South America. The best explanation anyone has offered is a raft of storm-torn vegetation, drifting for weeks with a handful of stowaways aboard. It sounds absurd. It's still the leading theory. The population that stayed became the Old World monkeys and eventually the apes. By 23 million years ago, the apes had arrived, distinguished from monkeys by no tail and a bigger brain. One early candidate, proconsul, mixed a monkey's body with an ape's teeth so thoroughly that some researchers still hesitate to call it a true ape. A warming climate let them sprawl across Eurasia. Swamp specialists turned up in Spain, forest dwellers in Hungary, island apes off the coast of Italy. For a while, it looked like the apes had won the planet. One of them nearly rewrites the whole human story. In a Bavarian clay pit, a team led by Madeleine Boma found the bones of at least 4 individuals of a small ape. They named it Danuvius guggenmosi, barely a meter tall, roughly 11.5 million years old. Its spine curved like a human spine. Its hips and knees were built for standing upright. Bome's team called its gait extended limb clambering. If Danuvius really moved this way, upright walking may have started in a European swamp, long before any hominin ever set foot in Africa. Then, the climate turned on all of them. A brutal cooling snapped shut at the end of the Miocene, and the Eurasian apes disappeared, one by one. Only Africa and a few pockets of Southeast Asia kept the ape story alive. Everything that swings from a branch today, or listens to a story like this one, descends from those 2 survivors. By 7 million years ago, the human line proper begins, looking less like a straight branch than a pile of experiments. Chimpanzees and humans, split from a shared ancestor around this point. Chimps kept climbing and knuckle-walking. Our side stood up, and, unlike every other ape that has ever dabbled in it, stayed up. In 2001, a team led by French paleontologist Michel Brunet was digging in Chad's Jurab Desert. It sat hundreds of kilometers from the Rift Valley, where almost every other early hominin had turned up. They pulled out a battered skull, dated to nearly 7 million years old. Chad's president nicknamed it Tumai, Hope of Life, in the local Daza language. Its skull looks mostly chimp, except for one detail. The hole where the spinal cord exits sits forward, near the base, the position expected in something walking upright. A million years later came Ardipithecus ramidus, nicknamed Ardi, found in Ethiopia. Her pelvis and skull hint at regular upright walking, though her feet kept a big toe built for gripping a branch. She was a hybrid, efficient on the ground, still road legal in the trees. Decades before Ardi was ever found, in 1924, a South African anatomist named Raymond Dart opened a box of quarry rubble. Inside was a small skull, its face too flat and its teeth too human for any known ape. Dart named it Australopithecus africanus and nicknamed it the Town Child. The establishment mocked him for it. Most researchers had already decided humanity's cradle would turn out to be Europe or Asia, an assumption owed more to prejudice than evidence. 50 years later, in Hadar, Ethiopia, paleoanthropologist Donald Johansen spotted an arm bone poking out of a slope. Within minutes, his team had a skull fragment, a thigh bone, a jaw. 3 weeks of digging turned up several hundred fragments, about 40% of one skeleton. That's an almost unheard of level of completeness for something 3.2 million years old. That night, the camp played a Beatles tape on loop, and somebody suggested the name Lucy. She stood barely 3.5 feet tall. Her wisdom teeth had already grown in, fully formed, just small. At Laetoli in Tanzania, members of her species left something even more convincing than bones. Footprints, 3.6 million years old, preserved in volcanic ash. Heel strikes first, weight rolls forward, toes push off last, the exact motion you used to walk to your kitchen this morning. There was no single cause for walking upright. Africa's forests were breaking apart into patchy woodland, and walking between food patches on 2 legs burned less energy than doing it on 4. It also freed the hands for carrying food, infants, tools. Orangutans, whose forests never broke apart, kept their long climbing arms. No pressure, no upright ape. Homo habilis appears a little after 3 million years ago, mostly in East Africa. Alongside it came crude stone tools, known as Oldowan choppers, heavy, unglamorous, sharp enough to crack bone and scavenge marrow. Homo erectus followed, fully upright, longer-legged, carrying a brain more than double the size of Australopithecus. By 1.8 million years ago, populations had reached Georgia and Indonesia, holding on in both places for over 1 million years. Africa produced the species. The species went sightseeing across 3 continents. The oldest known Homo sapiens fossil is a set of skull fragments from Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, dated to roughly 300,000 years ago. 2 competing stories tried to explain what happened next. Either sapiens evolved once, in Africa, and spread outward, or modern humans emerged in several places at once, kept in sync by gene flow. Which one actually happened? Genetics settled it. In 1987, geneticist Rebecca Cann traced mitochondrial DNA, passed down only through mothers, from people across the globe. Every line led back to one woman in Africa, somewhere between 150 and 200,000 years ago. The press nicknamed her Mitochondrial Eve, a better headline than description. She wasn't the only woman alive then, just the one whose maternal line never broke. It wasn't a clean sweep. Neanderthals were never the brutish stereotype. They had brains as large as ours and controlled fire, though small scattered groups left them badly placed for a changing world. Every one of those threads had to survive, unbroken, for you to be sitting here listening to this. A primate stranded on the wrong continent had to find a land bridge that closed at exactly the right moment. A raft of storm debris had to hold together for weeks across open ocean. A small ape in a Bavarian swamp had to leave descendants instead of a dead end. So did a hominin on the wrong side of the Rift Valley, unlike almost every other branch on this tree. You are not the product of a straight line. You're the product of the one thread out of dozens that happened not to snap. Right now, if your ancestry traces outside Africa, roughly 2% of your own DNA is Neanderthal. In Papua New Guinea, that figure runs as high as 6%, borrowed from Denisovans instead. It's proof, in your own cells, that the thread was never entirely clean. None of this is settled science, and it shouldn't sound like it is. Danuvius is still out there, complicating the timeline of upright walking by several million years, and nobody agrees on what to do with it. A million years after Tumai, another contested candidate, called Aurorin tuganensis, turns up in Kenya. Its thigh bone reads as shaped for an upright stance to some, and as nothing of the sort to others. The same fight is still running over Tomai's own thigh bone. One team reads it as proof of bipedalism, another as a knuckle-walking ape, and neither side has backed down. Homo erectus adds its own complication. It survived well over 1 million years outside Africa, in Georgia, and on Java, long enough for evolution to keep working on that population too. A century ago, Ernst Haeckel proposed the idea of a missing link connecting apes to humans, based on almost no fossil evidence at all. He sent a young Dutch anatomist to go looking on Java, and Erectus duly turned up there, as if summoned. Genetics later showed we're closer to African chimps than to any Asian ape, which only makes the long Eurasian detour stranger. The fossils marking our first steps outside Africa keep sliding further back as well. A jawbone from Israel now dates to nearly 200,000 years old. A skull fragment from Greece, dated to around 210,000 years, sat in a museum drawer for decades before anyone reconstructed it. It was found lying right beside a Neanderthal skull, roughly 40,000 years younger. It was as if two different species had each taken a turn on the same coastline, neither one aware the other had ever been there. None of these finds overturn the African story. They just prove it never stopped being written. Every thread that didn't snap led here, to hands that grip without thinking, to feet that already know how to walk. If any part of that chain was built specifically for you to exist, it's worth sticking around for what this channel digs up next. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell us which thread surprised you most.